Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. President Donald Trump says the US will help stranded ships in the Strait of Hormuz, but Iran is threatening an attack if that happens. Armenia hosts European leaders at 2 summits in Yerevan. And more leaked footage reveals alleged attempts to influence European institutions over Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. The US is launching a naval escort mission in the Strait of Hormuz as tensions with Iran continue to disrupt the key waterway. But Iran says any US interference in the Strait of Hormuz will be considered a violation of the ceasefire and that it could launch an attack in response. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump says the Washington will guide stranded vessels out of the Strait of Hormuz starting Monday. Posting on his Truth Social account, he described the effort, called Project Freedom, as a humanitarian move to help ships safely leave restricted waterways and resume normal trade. Trump did not name the countries involved, but warned that any interference would be dealt with forcefully. He also said US officials are holding very positive talks with Iran that could lead to broader progress, though he gave no details on coordination. Regarding Hormuz, top Iranian lawmaker warned that any US interference in the strait would violate a ceasefire. State-linked media said Tehran has received a US reply to its latest peace proposal, delivered through Pakistan, and is reviewing it. Iranian reports said the proposal calls for US forces to withdraw from near Iran's borders, an end to naval blockades on Iranian ports, and a halt to all hostilities, including Israel's offensive in Lebanon. The US has not formally confirmed its response, though Trump reportedly called the proposal unacceptable. Shortly after Trump's announcement, a tanker reported being hit by unknown projectiles in the Strait of Hormuz. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Agency said the incident occurred about 78 sea miles north of the United Arab Emirates, with all crew reported safe. It is the second attack in the strait within 24 hours. The US plan comes as hundreds of ships and up to 20,000 seafarers remain stuck in the strait due to the ongoing conflict. US Central Command says it will support the mission with 15,000 personnel, more than 100 aircraft, warships, and drones. Iran has restricted most shipping in the Gulf for over 2 months, pushing energy prices higher, while some vessels have reported being fired upon and others seized.
Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei has confirmed that Tehran has received the US counter-proposal to its 14-point plan via mediator Pakistan, which is being reviewed by the Iranian officials. Our correspondent Turaj Shireliliu has more.
The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei said it has been forwarded through Pakistan with answers of the United States to Tehran's proposals relayed last week to Washington. In an interview on the state-owned IRIB TV, he said that the U.S. counter-proposal is under review in Tehran, stressing that Iran's response to the U.S. non-point plan last week did not discuss the nuclear dispute at all. Iran has not revealed contents of its proposal, but according to the semi-official Tasnim and Fars news agencies affiliated to the Revolutionary Guards, it focuses on ending the war, not extending the ceasefire, and within 30 days instead of 2 months as suggested by the United States. They reported that guaranteeing non-aggression, withdrawing U.S. military forces from Iran's periphery, lifting the naval blockade, releasing Iran's frozen assets, paying compensation, lifting sanctions, ending the war on all fronts, including Lebanon, and a new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz were in Iran's 14-point proposal. Over the weekend, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held phone calls with the foreign ministers of Brazil, Germany, Oman, and Spain on Sunday, and also held phone contacts with his French, Italian, Japanese, and South Korean counterparts on Saturday. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said Araghchi's talks focused on bilateral relations and the latest regional and international developments, during which he briefed them on Tehran's initiatives to end the Israel-US imposed war on Iran. It is believed that Iran's top diplomat shared with his counterparts the details of Tehran's 14-point counter-proposal exchanged via the mediator Pakistan. Tura Shiralilu from Tehran, Foreign News.
Pakistan is intensifying its role as the primary mediator between the United States and Iran. Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar reaffirmed Islamabad's commitment to a diplomatic resolution during high-level talks on Sunday. It comes as Washington considers a 14-point Iranian peace proposal sent through Pakistani channels. Tehran's plan seeks to remove sanctions and to have the US withdraw forces from the region in exchange for a ceasefire on all fronts. French President Emmanuel Macron is urging the US and Iran to cooperate in reopening the Strait of Hormuz. He says diplomacy is the only way to unblock the strategic route. While the US is beginning a mission to help trapped crews, Macron has ruled out French participation in any military action.
Today, I'm looking at the situation. If the United States wants to reopen, or are ready to reopen, the Strait of Hormuz, that's very good. That's what we've been asking for since the beginning. But we're not going to participate in any operations using force within a framework which for my part doesn't seem clear. So we've built an ad hoc mission that we're working on. The military planning took place in London. But what we want most of all is a joint reopening between Iran and the United States. That's the only solution that will allow us to permanently reopen the Strait of Hormuz, allow free navigation, and do so without restrictions nor tolls.
OPEC Plus producers are set to raise their oil production cap in June after the United Arab Emirates withdrew from the bloc. 7 countries, including Saudi Arabia, Russia and Kazakhstan, agreed to increase the cap by 188,000 barrels per day. The group said output levels could still be increased, paused or reversed depending on market conditions. It also said the decision would help address any overproduction recorded since January 2024. Higher oil prices are expected to give Russia's state budget an extra boost as global energy markets remain under pressure. Russia's finance minister said the additional revenue would amount to about $2.7 billion. However, so far this year, revenues are still expected to remain below the first 5 months of 2025. Ukraine says it has struck Russian energy targets, including 2 Shadow Fleet tankers near the Black Sea port of Novorossiysk. In Russia's northwest, dozens of Ukrainian drones targeted the major oil export hub of Primorsk, sparking a fire that was later contained. Russian authorities say no oil spill was reported and more than 60 drones were intercepted. Moscow's mayor said a drone also struck a building in the capital, with emergency services responding and no injuries reported. Ukraine hasn't commented on the incident as both sides continue near daily drone exchanges. Now, staying with the war in Ukraine, Britain is moving closer to the European Union on defence support for Kyiv, as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrives in Yerevan for the European Political Community Summit. The package is worth $106 billion and is aimed at helping to cover Ukraine's needs for 2 years. Most of the money is expected to go toward military spending. London says the move could also help British defence firms supply Ukraine. The UK Prime Minister is also set to announce new sanctions on Russian companies linked to military supply chains.
Good to see you. Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Sweden has seized a tanker in the Baltic Sea that is suspected of being part of Russia's Shadow Fleet. European countries have been increasing their checks on vessels linked to Moscow's oil trade. Swedish authorities say police boarded the Syrian-flagged tanker on Sunday after it entered Swedish waters. Authorities opened an investigation citing irregularities in the vessel's flag status. The tanker has appeared on EU and British sanction lists and was believed to be carrying no cargo. Sweden says it has stopped 5 vessels this year for suspected offences, including oil spills and false flag use. Yerevan is hosting the 8th European Political Community Summit, bringing together dozens of leaders for talks focused on regional security and cooperation.
The 8th meeting of the European political community has begun in Armenia's capital, Yerevan, with leaders gathering for a series of high-level discussions. The summit opened with a roundtable focused on Ukraine, followed by an opening plenary session addressing European unity amid ongoing global crises. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan described the summit as a milestone for the country, highlighting unprecedented diplomatic engagement.
My first bilateral meeting with the President of Turkey took place on the margins of the mentioned first EPC summit in Prague. And now the Vice President of Turkey is here to participate in Yerevan's EPC summit and is the first Vice President of Turkey to come to Armenia. The Presidents of North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the European Parliament, Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, Croatia, Ireland, Andorra, Finland, Estonia, Luxembourg, Norway, Slovenia, Kosovo, Liechtenstein are visiting Armenia for the first time ever. This is another reason to consider this summit historic for Armenia.
European Council President Antonio Costa said the forum is aimed at turning political dialogue into concrete cooperation and thanked Armenia for hosting it.
And I'm glad that again, like in the previous summits, the EPC will be a catalyst for action. Action in support of Ukraine, Moldova and Armenia, and also in building a European coalition against drugs.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, speaking via video link, recalled earlier discussions with European leaders on hosting the summit in Yerevan and his support of it.
I supported that, and in my turn asked, in order to preserve the balanced approach, to hold one of the next summits in Azerbaijan. Proposal was accepted, so I invite the members of EPC to Azerbaijan in May 2028. And by the way, Armenia also supported our candidacy. This is a clear indication that peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia is a reality.
Among those attending the summit in Yerevan are French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is also taking part, marking Canada's first involvement in the European political community format. The summit continues with further discussions on security, connectivity and regional cooperation, alongside a series of bilateral meetings.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has sought to ease concerns over relations with Washington after US President Donald Trump reduced the number of US troops in Germany and introduced new increase on trade tariffs, raising questions about transatlantic ties. Merz spoke in a television interview stressing the importance of cooperation within the alliance.
I have to accept that the American president holds a different view on these issues than we do. But that does not alter the fact that I remain convinced that the Americans are important partners for us, the most important ones in the North Atlantic Alliance, and that we have a shared interest in Europe and America working together to end this conflict, and then, for example, to end the conflict, the war in Ukraine, to provide joint security guarantees for Ukraine. We have already achieved a great deal together in this regard.
3 people have died following a suspected hantavirus outbreak on a cruise ship in the Atlantic, according to the World Health Organization. 6 passengers have been affected, with 1 confirmed hantavirus case and another intensive care in South Africa. The World Health Organization says it's coordinating evacuations and assessing risks for those still on board. The outbreak was reported on the MV Hondius, which was travelling between Argentina and Cape Verde. 2 of the victims who died were Dutch nationals. Hantavirus is a rare virus and usually spread through contact with infected rodents. And to Syria now, where heavy rain has flooded parts of Aleppo. Farmers are scrambling to protect their land and crops.
Farmers in the Aleppo countryside of Syria are filling sandbags and covering crops with nylon. They're trying to hold back floodwater after days of heavy rain. Homes and farmland have been partly submerged, with water spreading across villages near the Al-Sia area. Local farmers say repeated breaches have left them watching their fields day and night, fearing more damage.
We have suffered material losses and can no longer afford to pay any further. The situation is very tragic. Regarding these embankments here that you see, the water level is approximately 5 meters. If this embankment breaks at this time, we are afraid of it. We have placed guards and are staying near our land because we fear for our crops.
The flooding has also reached homes, solar panels, and wide areas of agricultural land. Local officials say emergency teams were sent in to repair the breach and reinforce weakened sections of the embankment.
This year, due to heavy rains, significant pressure built up in the Al-Siha area in the southern Aleppo countryside, leading to a partial collapse of the earthen embankment, which caused flooding across approximately 560 hectares. We responded quickly to this situation, as all relevant departments were mobilized, and more than 12 excavators were deployed to repair the breach in the embankment and reinforce the weakened sections.
Authorities say teams are assessing the damage to farmland, while local committees have been formed with affected farmers. They have also contacted international partner organisations for help in supporting compensation efforts.
Amsterdam has become the world's first capital city to ban public advertisements for meat and fossil fuel products. The measure took effect on the 1st of May and covers billboards, tram shelters and metro stations. Adverts for burgers, petrol cars, airlines and fossil-heavy travel are being removed across the Dutch capital. City officials say the ban supports Amsterdam's climate goals, including becoming carbon neutral by 2050 and cutting meat consumption. Meat and travel industry groups criticise the move, calling it an unfair limit on consumer choice and commercial freedom. We'll take a short break now, and when we return, we'll discuss US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit to the Vatican and the broader implications for US-Vatican relations. Stay with us.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back. You're watching A News. Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is set to visit the Vatican and Italy in a trip that comes amid a public disagreement between Washington and Pope Leo XIV. The dispute has centred on differing positions regarding conflict and diplomacy, with the Pope maintaining criticism of ongoing military actions, while the US officials continue to defend their strategic approach. So what does this visit really tell us about the state of relations between Washington and the Vatican? To find answers, let's bring in our guest now. Philippe Avilés, religious affairs expert, joins us from Lisbon, Portugal. Philippe, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
Now, Marco Rubio's visit comes at a time of visible disagreement between Washington. Pope Leo XIV has been openly critical of aspects of US policy, particularly Gaza and what's going on in Iran at the moment. How unusual is it to see such direct public divergence?
Well, it's very unusual, especially in terms of the rhetoric actually employed by the U.S. administration. Now, we had a lot of focus on Donald Trump and his messages on social media, with using insulting language and language that is not at all expected from a head of state towards another head of state who also happens to be the religious leader of one of the biggest religions in the world. But he was not the only one. We had J.D. Vance also weighing in and defending Trump, even though Vance himself is a Catholic. And the one major figure from the U.S. administration who was absent, who kept himself at bay from this very public spat, was Marco Rubio, who is also a practicing Catholic, a cradle Catholic. And so he is now in a better position because he was not involved in the original spat to perhaps be the bridge builder and be the one to go to the Vatican to try and smooth things over.
Do you think, Philip, these sorts of agreements, do they carry practical consequences, or are they more largely symbolic?
Well, this meeting will be largely symbolic, but with many practical, in terms of perhaps foreign policy, largely symbolic. But we cannot forget that the U.S. is on the way to midterm elections. Donald Trump is finding himself in a difficult political situation at home. There's a lot of discontent with this war. There are a lot of people who are not happy with his policies. Of course, there's the traditional Democrat-Republican divide, but even within the Republican Party, many of people who would normally be considered a loyal base for the Republicans, more conservatively aligned Catholics, are not happy with his stance, not only in terms of the war in Iran and the situation in the Holy Land, for example, as you mentioned, but especially his rhetoric towards the Pope and his outbursts against the Pope and this very public divergence. And so there could be a very practical effect of this divergence in terms of those midterm elections. And so there is this need by the U.S. to try and smooth things over and show that the President of the United States of America, the administration, and the Pope in Rome are not at opposite ends of the spectrum. That is not something that he wants. That is not the image that he wants to play out. However, we cannot also forget that this trip is twofold. Marco Rubio will be visiting the Pope, and of course, from a visual perspective and from much of the world, this is perhaps the highlight of his trip, especially after the very public disagreement between Trump and the Pope. But he will also be visiting high figures of the Italian state. We're not sure yet if he will be visiting Giorgia Meloni herself, but he will definitely be meeting with her Secretary for Foreign Relations and possibly the Secretary for Defense. And Meloni is a very important figure in Europe. She's becoming a very central figure and one of the leaders in the European Union. And she has not been afraid to speak her mind, to criticize Donald Trump, even though they would have been considered naturally allies, and they were political allies for a long time. And so for a practical perspective, I think the meeting with the Italian government may have more immediate practical effects in terms of foreign policy, issues like withdrawal of troops from Europe and things like that, and support for NATO. So that's also definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, so as you said, Giorgia Meloni is certainly becoming more and more vocal in the Union. So how might this impact broader US relations with European partners?
Well, we're definitely at a crisis moment in terms of Donald Trump's relations with Europe and his often contradictory statements saying that he doesn't need Europe, that he can do very well without Europe, and then on the other hand complaining that Europe isn't supporting him in this war. The European leaders have mostly been of one voice in criticizing the way that Donald Trump went to war in Iran, not so much their disagreement with the Iranian regime, and I think that unanimously most European leaders would definitely not be in favor of the regime or the continuation of the regime, but the way Donald Trump seemed to have gone in without a plan. And the way things have played out since then with the current crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, with Iran managing to press for peace and at the same time seemingly impose conditions for peace that would not have been acceptable under previous administrations. The United States are losing face in Iran, and to lose face in Iran and on the international stage, and at the same time risk losing a historic and very important alliance with Europe, is not in the interest of the United States and is also not in the interest of Europe. But Europe does not want to get sucked into a war which doesn't seem to have a plan. There doesn't seem to be an exit strategy. And so I think Marco Rubio's visit to Meloni may be a way of trying to find a way out of this crisis, try and come up with a plan that will allow Europe to stand by the United States as the United States sues for peace and tries to make a peace agreement with Iran that will not leave it feeling humiliated or defeated, even if not militarily, at least strategically. And so definitely a very important moment on the next few days with this visit from Marco Rubio to Europe.
And Philippe, Pope Leo's continued to speak out despite criticism. What does that say about the Vatican's role on the global stage?
Well, Pope Leo said himself he was not afraid of the administration. He's not afraid to speak out. I think then he took an understandably more cautious tone in his next few statements. There was a lot of attempt. These statements were made on the first days of his trip to Africa. And then there was a lot of attention on his public speeches in Africa, and this idea that everything he said was somehow had a hidden meaning and was directed at Trump or the United States, which doesn't seem to have been the case. And on his return, he said no, these trips and the speeches were prepared long beforehand, and so any attempt to read them in light only of this divergence with the United States was misguided. So he is intentionally not played up this public spat with Donald Trump. He has no interest in doing so. He's clearly shown that the Vatican's position is one of wanting peace, of opposing wars, especially wars that are considered unjust, and any war in which one enters without a plan, without a firm idea of what one intends to do, would by definition not fall under the just war theory, no matter how bloodthirsty the regime one is fighting against is. There are so many other things to take into consideration, and so I think the Vatican is at a position where it has no interest in turning the United States into its enemy or being portrayed as an enemy of the United States. And so the Vatican has all the interest in meeting with Rubio and in coming to an understanding with the United States. Of course, we still don't know if the Pope will himself be meeting with Marco Rubio, as we don't know if Meloni will be meeting with Marco Rubio. I very much doubt that the Pope would go to any length to avoid a meeting with Marco Rubio. There will be a meeting with the Secretary of State, the equivalent to a Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Vatican, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. Of course, this is where the meat of any agreements will be discussed and anything of substance. Of course, Iran, Lebanon, a very important country for the Vatican, anything that's going on in the Holy Land, and the Vatican is very cautious with what is going on in the Holy Land at the moment, not only in Gaza, attacks on Christian settlement, Christian towns in the West Bank. Just a few days ago, an attack on a French Catholic nun in the Old Town in Jerusalem. These are seen as signs of growing extremism in Israel, which are showing themselves in attacks on Christian symbols and people as well. And so all of these things are of concern to the Vatican, and these are things that will be discussed. Now, I'm sure that there will also be a meeting. I'm confident that there will also be a meeting between Pope Leo and Marco Rubio during this visit.
Felipe, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for your analysis and time.
Thank you.
A short break now. When we return, we'll look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News, and now we turn to our regional stories. New footage featuring the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo, has emerged. Now, in the video, Ocampo is allegedly discussing an artificial intelligence project linked to Armenia and the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. The material claims the project expanded from academic research into broader use involving media, politics and international networks. Here's more.
Minval Politica has released a third set of footage it claims shows former International Criminal Court prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo discussing an artificial intelligence project linked to Armenia and Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. According to the outlet, Ocampo describes plans to build a platform using AI in cooperation with academics from the Brazilian University of São Paulo and specialists in physics and technology. He allegedly says the project uses advanced computing, including supercomputers, to model global political dynamics.
And the next step for me is see how can organize it in a platform to use artificial intelligence to do this properly. So I'm working with the São Paulo University, with the physics department on a project on artificial intelligence. Now I spend days in Spain with some friends of mine who are involved in this type of companies, we're debating how the Armenia project is a pilot of a company using artificial intelligence.
Si vamos a hablar de esto, es una cosa que no quiero asustarte, pero yo hago muchas cosas. También soy profesor en la Universidad de São Paulo, en Brasil. Trabajo con un físico, con el departamento de física. Estamos usando la física moderna, que básicamente la inteligencia artificial, para modelizarlo y tratar de organizar el orden global y el desorden global. Y entonces tenemos base en financia eso, tenemos supercomputadoras trabajando en eso. Y pusimos el foco al principio que vamos a hacer orden global en general. Después dijimos, no, es muy complicado, hagamos genocidio. Y después dijimos, hagamos una Karabakh, que yo tengo mucha información. Estamos sacando una Karabakh. Ahora, yo veo este producto académico, hacer un producto académico. Yo tengo que sacar el jugo de yo. Estoy tratando de armar una compañía que va a hacer ese cross-border, que transforme la información que produzcamos acá, que llegue a los políticos que toman decisiones, que llegue a los decision makers, que eso es no técnica, precisa, que llegue a los mainstream media, social media, para que sea masivo. Deben que llegue a otros académicos para que solidifique.
Pero tú estás desarrollando un programa utilizando inteligencia artificial.
Sí.
Porque hay programas, hay think tanks que se juntan para aconsejar a la gente que toma decisiones y no existe hace mucho tiempo.
Sí.
Pero
Minval Politica says the material suggests efforts to combine academic work, media outreach, and technology for political influence. It also repeats earlier claims about anti-Azerbaijan lobbying networks and funding links involving Armenian and Russian-Armenian figures. A News has not independently verified the footage or the allegations.
The High Representative of the European Union, Kaja Kallas, is set to visit Azerbaijan on Tuesday. The focus of the high-level meetings in Baku will be on strengthening bilateral relations and regional cooperation. During the visit, Kallas will hold talks with the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ceyhun Bayramov. Key topics include strategic partnership, energy dialogue, and regional security. 10 wagons carrying fertilizer are being transported from Russia to Armenia, transiting through Azerbaijan. The shipment is scheduled to depart from Bilajari station on Monday afternoon. This follows a separate delivery on Sunday, where 8 wagons carrying over 500 tons of fertilizer were sent along the same route toward Büyük Kasık. Uzbekistan has outlined major new economic and regional initiatives as global leaders gather in Samarkand for the Asian Development Bank's annual meeting. A News correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
Uzbekistan has presented a series of large-scale development initiatives at the 59th annual meeting of the Asian Development Bank in Samarkand, focusing on digital transformation, green energy and regional connectivity. Speaking at the opening session, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev highlighted the country's economic progress, noting that since 2016, Uzbekistan has attracted more than $150 billion in foreign investment, while its economy has nearly tripled to $147 billion, with plans to grow the economy to over $240 billion by 2030. A key focus of the address was future-oriented development, including the launch of more than 200 artificial intelligence projects and plans to establish a regional AI hub, alongside expanding digital infrastructure and training programs. Additionally, Uzbekistan aims to increase the share of renewable energy to 54% by 2030, building on existing wind and solar projects. Regional cooperation was another priority, with proposals to strengthen transport and logistics links, including the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, expected to reduce delivery times and significantly boost trade capacity. In addition, Uzbekistan announced its intention to join new international initiatives on critical minerals and digital connectivity, as well as proposing regional projects such as the Central Asia Green Belt and the Unified Tourism Road. ADB President Masato Kanda emphasized the need for deeper regional integration, noting that in today's fragmented global environment, coordinated cross-border solutions are essential to ensure stable and inclusive growth. The country also reaffirmed the strategic partnership with the Asian Development Bank, with a total project portfolio of nearly $16 billion, alongside a new cooperation program worth $12.5 billion through 2030. It is Cyril Rajab reporting from Samarkand, Uzbekistan, A News.
The UN has urged Afghanistan's authorities to release detained journalists and protect press freedom. The call came on World Press Freedom Day amid warnings that Afghan media workers face censorship, intimidation and arrest. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
Richard Bennett, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Afghanistan, says press freedom has sharply declined since the Taliban returned to power. He called for all detained journalists to be released immediately and unconditionally. Bennett said Afghan media workers face censorship, surveillance, harassment and legal restrictions, forcing many into self-censorship. He warned that reporting on sensitive issues, especially women's rights or criticism of the Taliban, can carry serious risks. Bennett also said women journalists face extra barriers, including movement restrictions, dress codes, and workplace discrimination. UNAMA also marked World Press Freedom Day by saying freedom of expression and support for journalism are key pillars of peace. Afghanistan's Ministry of Information and Culture says Afghan authorities supports the media, but says outlet must work within religious, cultural and national values. A spokesperson said more than 140 new media outlets and institutions were granted licenses last year. The UK Special Representative for Afghanistan, Richard Lindsay, also marked the day by highlighting freedom of expression, saying Afghan reporters continue vital work in difficult circumstances. Bennett ended his statement by saying a free and independent press is not only a cornerstone of human rights, but indispensable for Afghanistan's future. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Tourism across Central Asia is gaining momentum, with millions of visitors choosing the region as a new travel destination. But behind this growth, competition is intensifying. A News correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina reports from Kazakhstan.
Competition for tourists is intensifying across Central Asia as visitor numbers continue to rise and countries compete more actively for global attention. According to research by a Commonwealth partnership, travel to the region has grown significantly, but the distribution of tourists is beginning to shift. Kazakhstan remains the most visited destination. However, its neighbors are expanding at a much faster pace. In the first half of 2025, Kazakhstan received 7.5 million visitors, up 8.7% year-on-year. By comparison, Uzbekistan saw tourism surge by nearly 48%, while Tajikistan recorded growth of more than 30%. This means Kazakhstan still leads in volume, but the regional balance is gradually changing. Within the country, tourist flows remain predictable. The capital Astana relies largely on business travel and major events. Almaty, meanwhile, attracts a broader mix of visitors. The profile of visitors is also evolving. Most tourists still arrive from CIS countries, but there has been a sharp increase in arrivals from China. After one of the world's longest pandemic lockdowns, the number of Chinese tourists has grown roughly fivefold. Interest from India, Turkey and Europe is also steadily increasing. At the same time, countries in the region are setting long-term goals. Tajikistan, for example, aims to become a leader in ecotourism by 2030, focusing on its natural resources and strategic location. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll turn to regional developments in the South Caucasus and a major political summit underway in Yerevan. We'll see you shortly.
Figura Armenia que Argentina. Y empieza por plata y es para los gobiernos. Un tipo muy piola. No, money from Armenia from Russia. Group of Russian Armenians. People who are financial days. Some rich Armenians. They live in Russia. Pashinyan lo puso. Pashinyan is not protecting the own Kerala. The Armenian game is Russia. No con Pashinyan mismo, pero.
Que remuevan a Pashinyan.
Welcome back to A News. We now shift our focus to a regional story for discussion. World leaders are gathering in Yerevan for the European Political Community Summit as Armenia hosts the high-level forum. Alongside the summit, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has met with the OSCE Secretary General, highlighting ongoing diplomatic engagement and security and regional stability. The developments come at a time when the South Caucasus remains a focal point for dialogue, with broader questions surrounding peace processes, connectivity and international involvement. Now let's bring in our guest, Associate Professor Orkan Valiev, Head of Department at Khazar University, joining us from Baku, Azerbaijan. Professor Orkan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
So the European Political Community Summit is being hosted in Yerevan. How significant is this moment for Armenia diplomatically, and what does the EPC platform actually aim to deliver beyond symbolism?
Thanks again. Well, it's I think it's a great opportunity for the future of the country. I mean, Armenia. In order to diversify the relations and as an independent the country that the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has repeatedly emphasized at different platforms. Therefore, I think it's the great opportunity for the country's future. So, as you emphasized at the beginning, Armenia is hosting the high level of leaders within the framework of the summit, including the Prime Minister of Canada as well. And also, they will have an opportunity to discuss different kinds of the issues, and also throughout the independence history. I mean, the 35 years. It's I think ever the first the the global international the summits that Armenia is being hosted by Armenia. And then they brought the high level of leaders within the European Union and to Armenia, so including the General Secretary of the Organization of Security, the Cooperation in Europe as well. So they will have an opportunity to discuss the issues in terms of the region and also the global issues that maybe will be able to contribute to the establishment of the peace regionally and globally. So this is a great opportunity for Armenia.
But the EPC, on the other hand, has been described as a forum for strategic dialogue rather than decision-making of any kind. So in practical terms, what can countries in regions like the South Caucasus realistically gain from it?
Yeah, we can analyze the questions in terms of the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's the opening the speech. For example, the focus on the regional peace and the the global peace. He said that that's opening the ceremony that just Azerbaijan and Armenia, now as the peacetime, we started to live in the peacetime. We have peace with Azerbaijan, and we started to strengthen and institutionalize the peace in the region. And also, he said that I hope that this process, the summit will contribute not just to the regional peace, and also international peace in terms of Ukraine and in Middle East the issue. So therefore, I think it's quite one of the positive steps. The hosting the European Union, the community summit in Europe.
And President Ilham Aliyev stated that Azerbaijan supported holding the EPC summit in Armenia and even invited members to Baku in 2028. How should we interpret this in terms of signalling the broader peace narrative?
Yeah, the President Aliyev in his the speech where he joined online, that now there is a real the peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we started to go to live in peace and learning from the process since the last the Washington summit, which is just 9 months, the peacetime between two nations, which is quite an historic, and also Azerbaijan supported Armenia's candidacy for the summit, and Armenia supported Azerbaijan's the candidacy for the upcoming the summit in 2028. And the Prime Minister emphasized that he's joined the respective summit, which is going to be held in Azerbaijan, in Baku as well. So I think this is quite one of the positive the process, because the Washington summit was the milestone and also the breakthrough towards the establishment of the peace between the two nations, which is quite strategic steps for the future of the region, not just the between two nations. So I think yes, with President Aliyev's delivery and the points that he emphasized during his speech, quite enough important, and that Azerbaijan did.
And have we seen any reactions to the statement by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev from the European Parliament in particular?
Sorry, I couldn't hear very well.
Have we had any reactions come through after the speech delivered by President Ilham Aliyev, particularly from the European Parliament?
I think ahead of the speech and having the summit in Yerevan, which is already the achievement, because I think the contribute to the establishment of the Trump Road or Zangezur Corridor for peace and prosperity that has been mentioned by Prime Minister Pashinyan as well. So therefore, I think this is the strategic, the positive, the steps towards the future of the region, connectivity, not just the signing of the peace agreement, the connectivity, so which just includes economic the cooperation that makes the region the transit hub. So that will contribute to the cooperation between two nations, which is the critical issue, because without the economic and cultural economic cooperation, the political the achievements will be just minimal. meaningless. So therefore, I think it is quite enough the positive steps towards the process, because it has been mentioned by the Prime Minister that we are working on the establishment of the Trump role.
Okay, one last question, Professor Orkan. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also met with the OSCE Secretary General on the sidelines. Briefly, what does this tell us about Armenia's current diplomatic priorities?
Yes, the General Secretary General Feridun Sinirlioğlu visited Armenia is in Yerevan on the occasion of his visit, his participation at the summit. So they met the summit. So then focused on the strengthening the relation with Armenia, and also the strategy towards the contributing to the peace in the region, which is the critical in the future of the region. So I think this the meeting, and also ahead of other meetings, the Prime Minister Pashinyan's meetings with the leaders, they will bring the strategic opportunities for Armenia, and also the peace process as well.
Okay. Professor Orkan Valiev, thank you so much for joining us on the program. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for the analysis.
My pleasure.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.